We want me to go?
Yeah.
I met David, I must have been 15. I met him, we were coming away home, me and some friends, and a friend of mine pulled up in a car and he was with him. And that's how we first met.
And did how long did that? And then you went out together, and then so when did you become his sort of first time girlfriend?
I was not long after, about 2 weeks,
Oh right.
and I was with him for quite a few years, and I think it was till 1965. So I would have been 18
Right.
when.
So when the so David was I know briefly he worked in the print, didn't he? Then he was a window cleaner.
He was a window cleaner. He worked for the London Window Cleaning Company. Funny enough, my father worked there 7 years ago, so they talked all about it when they got together. Yeah, so that was in Chelsea he worked, yeah.
And so how long had you been going out once? So you were a long-term girlfriend once the Colenso Diamond happened.
Yes. So I'd been with him about 3 years.
And did you know David kind of nicked stuff before, or was it all kind of?
No, he was just an ordinary boyfriend and girlfriend situation. Went to the pictures, went there, done that. But we both worked, so you know it wasn't a fact that he was pinching or anything.
Right. So when did you first come aware of the Colenso Diamond thing?
Can I stop it there? Sorry.
So sorry, I'm not very good at this. When did so the Colenso Diamonds happened? You know, it was stolen. What did you? So the first thing you found out about that was that David being arrested, or was it?
No. The first time I ever heard of the Colenso Diamonds was the phone call I got from his mother saying that he'd been arrested, and it was a shock, total shock.
And where was he taken?
Chelsea, I think. I wasn't with his mother then. She only got to phone me quickly to tell me the basics of what was happening.
Cut. Okay, we're rolling now, sir.
Okay, so you'd start the thing. So the first time I found out about.
Yeah, the first time I found out about the Colenso Diamond was the phone call I received stating that he'd been arrested for taking it. So it was a shock to everybody.
And then how long was he on remand for? Can you remember?
It must have been about a couple of months, if that.
And how was that? Was obviously Dolly was very much, he didn't do it, but were you all just completely shocked?
No, of course, they were shocked. The families, everybody was shocked. It was just, well, we'd never been near a prison either, you know, so, you know, going to places like this was all new to everybody, and we were just hoping that it was going to be one big mistake.
So when you, Dave, you mentioned before that David's room, he had a picture of some diamonds.
Yeah, it was brought up out of a catalogue that we were all looking at, and it was something to cover up the walls more than anything, and that was given in evidence by the prosecution, which I had to go in the box, and it was a magazine I bought him, you know, so I didn't understand what the fuss was about.
And sorry, just to backtrack a little bit, when you were with David for the, was he in the V&A at that time? Was he living there?
Yes, he was in the V&A.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Can I cut it there?
And he'd done the 2.5 years. He had a place down just by Fulham Broadway. He had a room when he came out of prison. And he had a car. His mum had saved up and he had some money for when he came out. And there was something wrong with the tax disc. And the police arrested him for it. I think the tax disc might have been out of date. I don't know if you want that in there or not. But this is very strange. He had to go to court the next day. And while he was waiting to go into court, the police officer said to him, this was at West London, "You're in trouble here today." He said, "What, over a driving offence?" He said, "No, you've been picked out of our photos for committing a robbery in Victoria from a jeweller's." Instead of him keeping his mouth shut, he said, "No, I was in prison." The police officer said, "No, you wasn't. You came out in October or November or what?" He said, "No, I never. I didn't come out till May the next year." That was the biggest mistake he made in his life. Because if those blokes got, those prison officers, those policemen got into court and picked him out, he had the best alibi in the world. But they thought that he'd done the 2 years. They didn't know he lost the 6 months. That was the biggest mistake David ever made. They were going to try and fit him up.
So do you think that was pretty common then, that they would just fit people to crimes at that point?
Well, you'd have to go some to pick him out, saying that he could. Had to drop that a bit rapid, didn't they? But if he had kept his mouth shut, he'd have walked away with the fact that perhaps the Colenso diamond wasn't taken by him.
Yeah.
If they could do that. But I think he was frightened after doing 2.5 years. He had been out a little while. And I think he was frightened that he'd go back. But on reflection, it would have been the best thing that had ever happened to him. Wouldn't it?
Yeah. Unless, like you say, was a master criminal and he got out.
Yeah, they went back in.
So,
I came back on now, sir.
okay. So, did we get any of that at all?
Just the end bit, yeah.
Okay, but that was, I think that was quite good. Would you mind repeating that, Kaz? What you just said about the driving offence
Yeah.
and stuff? Because I think
That's
that's
quite an interesting
Yeah, I think
storyline,
it's a really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I would. Whenever. Now?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, there was a very strange thing that happened. In fact, a dangerous thing for David, in a sense. He came out of prison and he was renting a little room down in Fulham Broadway, and he acquired a car that his mother had been saving up for, and we were driving along one day and he got stopped. There was something wrong with the car tax. Anyway, he was taken to the police station and told to appear at West London the next day. So off we went to West London to answer this charge of something wrong with a tax disc, when he was approached by a police officer and said, "Oh, you won't be leaving here today very quickly." And David said, "Why is that?" He said, "You was seen at a robbery last year in Victoria." And David said, "No, I never. I was in prison." He said, "No, you wasn't. You got a 3-year sentence that you done 2 years for." He said, "No, I done 2 years, 6 months because I lost remission. So I could not have been at that robbery." And that really, I felt, was they trying to fit him up again. But they came unstuck. Was that all right? Mm.
Yeah.
when he was on remand and it was all happening, I mean, and you say everyone was just in complete disbelief about it. Did you ever think that he will go down for this, or did
No, I didn't. And in fact, I had to come away from my job to visit him most days in Brixton, where they were remanded at the time. And I really thought he would be home. Big shock to everybody.
So the other thing I'd like to talk about is just the actual case. Can you remember? You remembered the judge. Was there any? Who was David's barrister? Could you?
I can't remember at the
No.
time. I can't. It was so long ago.
Yeah.
Plus the fact, because I was giving evidence, I used to sit outside.
Right, of course, yeah.
I wasn't allowed to sit in until I was called.
And when did Private Eye get involved then? Were they? But they were involved after the case, basically.
Oh,
after
after.
the trial,
Yeah, the first time I ever knew anything about it was when with Paul Foote, who was outside the prison gates when we were waiting for David to come home. And that was the first time.
And had David been in contact with them about the?
I think they might have been. My memory's not so good now because we're going back many years, but I'm wondering if Paul Foote went in on a visit one day.
So that was probably a result of David and Dolly campaigning.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. His mother done an awful lot for the campaigning.
I was going to say, could you? What I really remember, I really love those stories of David asking you to do, and my mum as well, to do ridiculous things to protest his innocence.
Chained myself to the railings and number 10 Downing Street was one of them. And going at the time I was working for the gas board, that would have gone down very well, wouldn't it? I declined the offer on that.
Was Dolly upset about it, or did she think you were being
But I don't think she was very happy with me because I think she actually had gone in people's houses of people in power. How she never ended up in the cell next to him, I will never know.
I'm just trying to. So, once he's in prison, and you know it's a harsh reality of that's it. What sort of things were going on then? You were going to visit, and was he still protesting his innocence?
Oh yes. Well, the visiting was once a month, and I had to get a job that I was a temp at, so I could have the times off to go down to see him, because he was in Maidstone for a while. So, and he was protesting all the time, always in striped, coloured patches at the time. I asked him what he'd done, and he said he tried to escape. Yes, and then of course after a while he was then transferred back to Scrubs.
And that's where he finished his term.
Yes, and I think he'd done some solitary confinement in there at the time.
So, and do you think he had a nervous breakdown then?
Oh yes, yeah.
And was there a suicide attempt in that?
Yes.
Because I don't think, you know, my mum's still very vague on those sort of things, whether,
Yeah.
you know.
Do you think we could talk about that a bit more, sort of, to say while he was in, this is what happened, etc.
Yeah.
Sort of string it all together in one statement.
Yeah,
Yeah, rather
right.
because you just asked a question and it was a yes answer. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we could do that, that'd be good.
So I think so if you say from his time in the Scrubs. It was
Oh
sort of like-
yes, he was always. One time, as I say, he cut his wrists. I think he just didn't want to go on, and he was probably on a special watch regime then, because he just couldn't see any way out.
And that was in
One of the Scrubs, yeah.
And is that okay, Richard? Is that?
Yeah, it's just you're talking in the middle of it again.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
it's tricky because it's not natural.
Yeah, yeah.
But you need to sort of say when he went to Wormwood Scrubs, this
Mm.
happened, and string it together as one statement. Really. That's
Okay.
key.
So if you repeat Kazov, I'm saying so when he was when he was Wormwood Scrubs, so you repeat when he was in
Yeah.
Wormwood Scrubs. Okay. So it would be so David over three years. He spent some time in Maidstone.
Yeah,
And then he came back, and then he got moved to the Scrubs, where he finished his sentence. So just from there, and then say that he
Yeah.
tried to commit suicide. So yeah, is that
yeah. Well, when Davies was sentenced, he was taken to Wormwood Scrubs. He had a 3-year sentence, and he was put in Wormwood Scrubs. After a while, he was transferred to Maidstone Prison, and I think he was really starting then to get the bad depression. It really hit him, and he was up to things of trying to escape and being very depressed, and he eventually ended up back into Wormwood Scrubs, and there he did attempt to cut his wrists. So I think quite a lot of the time he was kept in a cell and looked upon as someone who would try to kill themselves.
Yeah, perfect. That kind of is perfect.
when he was inside? I wondered, was it always bleak the meeting, or was there some levity? Was there some humour and stuff?
Oh, most of the time, of course, his mother was with me, or I was with his mother, so he possibly held himself together a lot more than when I was on my own, which wasn't very often because his mother was there most of the time. But when I was on my own, he really opened his heart, of the deep depressions that he was going through. So I think it was just that he cared so much about his mother, he didn't want to hurt her as much as he had been hurt.
But that must have been hard for you as well.
Well, I was still quite young, and I was still temping. I had to temp because of getting to see David once a month. And I was just looking forward to the day he would come out, because it became a way of life, getting ready to go to see someone that was innocent in a prison. So, but I was still quite young, as I say, and I had a lot of friends, so it wasn't that hard as it could have been. If I had been married and had a family, it would have been just unbearable.
But you still weren't married at this point.
No, he wasn't married at this point.
So you could have easily not bothered.
Oh no, but I think, in those days, you courted, had an engagement party. It's not like nowadays, so... Oh no, I knew he was coming home. Well, I thought that he would be home. That's why we kept the visits up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Would that be all right?
Yeah?
Okay, Kaz, we'll go.
The first time I ever heard about the Colenso diamond was when I received a phone call from David's mother. And she said to me, David's been taken for the theft of the Colenso diamond. I didn't take in what she was really talking about at first. She was so very upset, and so was we all. And that was the first time I ever heard of the Colenso diamond.
Perfect.
I felt I could not believe when the summing up was
Actually,
taken up. The trial at the Old Bailey didn't linger on for long because they had no evidence really. So when the summing up came by the judge, it was over and done with in no time at all. And what question he gave the jury was, do you take the word of these two fine outstanding police officers or the word of this window cleaner? And at the time, people just didn't think that police officers lied or anything under oath. So that was a bigger shock than the first part when he was taken, I think. And the jury at the time did believe in police officers, and they had a choice to make and they took the wrong one, and David got found guilty.
And then what happened to the officers later in, I don't know how long it was, 2 or 3 years later, they themselves were convicted for fraud, weren't they?
Oh, they were.
So why don't you give us that as well?
I didn't know a lot about that because that was done by a private eye, first found out. David did go and see one of them, did you know that?
Talk to Paul and then let's start that again.
After some time, it was nearing, I'm not sure if David was out, but the two police officers who was taken as fine outstanding men were both serving time in prisons in this country, which I found quite shocking myself personally, that these two men's word was taken over the window cleaner. And they ended up, one I think was doing 7 years. I can't remember much about it now, and the other one I think was doing 3. And that, of course, people were interested in that because it did seem a bit of a shock that my husband had been put away on the word of two police officers who ended up, one of them, with a higher sentence than he got.
Great statement, that last one.
All I can remember, you must look this up, the neighbour next door who was a barrister watched him do it.
Talk to Paul, Cass.
Watched him do it, and I think the other one was over a fight in a club. That's the best I can remember about it. Smith and Harris, I think they were called.
Great. And the other thing that you had a night on the phone about Jimmy Evans and stuff, I know you didn't want to go
No,
talk too much about that.
I wouldn't in case he's still alive.
But you were. It was interesting that the idea that there was a committee set up to start procedure into looking again at David's case.
Yeah.
Because
He was giving evidence at the Old Bailey in a murder trial. And that's where they went up. And I think when they looked into things that they realised that these policemen could have been telling the truth. Wasn't on what he'd done then, but association, which he met in prison.
So if you just introduce that, Kaz, again, just say that there was an inquiry after David was released.
Yeah, there was an inquiry after David was released, and I think because he had made acquaintances with some people who he met in prison, because he had a friendship with one or two of them, I think this went against the inquiry. And they were taking it that because he was talking to people he spent a couple of years with, that made out he was a criminal himself. But they were the only friends he made were in prison.
And I think it's quite nice when you sort of said that you know, the inquiry went to see him and he was at the murder. It was that.
Well, yeah, I actually said he was. You know, it was something that I think that's what done the inquiry, was his association with criminals, and especially one who was on trial for murder and he was giving evidence. I think that was best left out, to be quite truthful, myself personally. I think and especially if he's crawling about still, Evans.
Yeah.
You know, so that would make David look worse if we said he was at a murder trial. I think myself, but if I was watching the telly, I'll say, oh,
Yeah.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Maid was in prison because that's where he was stuck for 2.5 years.
Makes sense.
Yeah, all his other friends have moved on.
But yeah, and but the interesting thing is that, you know, the inquiry.
David.
It's
What?
really not about that, is it?
No,
They
it's
were
what
set up to
Yeah,
investigate this piece of justice.
yeah,
All other surrounding evidence has nothing to do with it.
no. And of course he went from bad to worse after that. When, is the camera on?
Yeah, do you want me to...
Yeah. He got nicked for it. And the regional came down. He was living with Sandy by this time.
Right.
And don't forget, they only lived round the corner. I mean, I had the piss taken out of me quite a lot. I shouldn't even be doing this for him. But anyway, he wasn't a bad guy. But they came down to me one day with a search warrant. Although he'd been taken from Sandy's, they took quite a few of them, Reggie Gilbert, Bernard, everyone, and put them in separate nicks. David was taken to Shepherd's Bush. No, he wasn't. He was in Hammersmith. The rest, it was a thing, a big thing. It was done to get rid of crime. And they came down to my house and they had a search warrant and they went out to the garden. I didn't have the other bedroom then, and they were going through the cats and the birds, like little homes and things like that. And I said, my mum was sitting there. And they said to me, now you know a lot about David. I said, I know nothing about David anymore. I'm not with David anymore. And they said, well, we got him and his friends, and we would like, you must know something. I said, I know nothing. I don't know anything about him. I'm not with him anymore. I don't know anything. But you must know. I said, I know nothing. I don't know a thing. And they tried so hard for me to talk about his friends, and I never... And then one of them said, oh, we've been round to see Dave, he's in bed with Sandy. I said, well, you know what a shithole he's living in there, don't you? And that question was quickly erased from their way of thinking. But they did come round to me and ask me to grass people up. I said, I don't know anything. I said, David never came home. I don't know. He was a bird man. He loves women, and that was it. I said, and so he's, you know, it's not, I don't know anything about his past or what he got up to in his business. And they let people like Reggie Gilbert and all that lot go. But they were definitely asked, you know, thinking that this was a bigger group than what it was. I mean, I don't know who they thought they were the Foreman's or something, you know, this side of... But that's when he was living with Sandy then. She was they took her as well. They said, and we got that bird as well. I thought, oh, really? You know, and that's why she moved. She moved up to Peterborough afterwards. But it was a swoop on all of them. Took them all. Because Windle come round and he said, thanks a lot. I mean, he thanked me for it, but I was never going to become a grass anyway. But they certainly wanted to do him. There was no two ways about it. Do them all. And I can't understand why.
Well, I think like
Change
you
of
say,
nature.
there probably was.
he was then working.
Start that again, Kaz.
So
Sorry, gap and then start. Go. Okay.
right, we got married in 1970, and we lived then in Shepherd's Bush, and he was working for a window cleaning firm and doing a night cleaning in things like Guinness Brewery and that. And we then had an exchange, and I went back to Fulham, where I lived then. And we had hardly any trouble, no trouble really down there, and I'm still living there, so yeah, and that's where he was working. Can't think of the cleaning firm now, but they were, I know he'd done a lot of work in the breweries, at Guinness Brewery and that, at night, which was the only time you could work and clean them, clean the vats and things.
And how long did it take before he stopped doing that and devoted his time to other interests?
Oh, about 18 months, I suppose. Yeah, about 18 months.
And I was just wondering if there was, I know there's certain things you don't really want to talk about, sort of, but I just wondered if there's any sort of funny stories from that time. There's certain, you know, like the last time I saw you, you told me about the penthouse mailing list that he
Oh yes, that was a classic. I think he wanted the mailing list, and we had Penthouse at an office round the corner from where we lived, and he wanted their customers' names and addresses to do a scam. Apparently, I didn't know this, and he went missing for 3 weeks, and apparently he had wrote to people on the mailing list that he would have a very, very dirty looking magazine if they were to send him by postal order X amount of money. And some of the letters that he read, well, I won't possibly tell you about them. I just didn't even know how you could do it. But he, I don't think, well, by this time I hardly saw him. He was in and out. But I did hear about the mailing list. I think the postman couldn't get up the hill to the rented accommodation he had with so many letters with their postal orders in his post bag.
The thing is, as well, knowing David, is that he probably only did A's and B's out of that list as well, and probably got bored.
Oh, he probably did. But there were some really, he read 1 or 2 stories that wouldn't be fit for this television programme. But yes, so that was the type of thing he got up to. By that time, things wasn't really good with us because he was staying out. I probably, if I had any sense, I would have known it was another woman, and that would have been over. But he always had an excuse. So,
Can you remember when he started working as a little group, or?
well, he met Brian through my neighbour, and Bernard's brother was in the scrubs with him. That's how he met him. That's how he met Bernard. But other than that, you've got to remember, I was really, I was working, I had friends at work, so if he wasn't in, I was going out sociably with friends. So I never really got into his business or anything. So, but he had made friends with people. He had his own group.
And I always remember this convoluted story that David told me that always sounded like something from a P.G. Wodehouse, sort of about him wanting to get a good character witness who was going to save some cats being chucked in the river.
Oh, that was, yes, he wanted to, he was trying to get out. The police wanted him for something, and he needed time to get himself together, and he got a friend to throw some cats into the river, and when on the way down he jumped in to save them, and he knocked himself out with one of the posts that holds Hammersmith Bridge up and landed in hospital. And the man who saved him, who had a boat on the river, I think got a medal. I completely washed my hands of the whole episode. I do know there was a very funny thing. Is that, turn that off a minute.
Still, that, so later on, so he's just talking about things that he's done, and later on he talks about he's kind of telling everybody that he's stolen
I knew his driver, Pete the Scar.
Pete the Scar.
Yeah, he had a big scar down here. He used to drive him. He threw her jewellery in the Thames.
Who? Sophie Wren?
Yeah, because the buyers wouldn't give him what it was worth. So he said, well, sod you all, it can go. And he threw it. And his driver told me that.
So later on, I just find it, yeah.
Art important paintings, yeah.
I ever got interested in the Vermeer, I'd returned quite a lot of works of art in exchange for my liberty. Whether rightly or wrongly, I took the Vermeer. My purpose for stealing it was to get myself out of trouble. A number of paintings would have sufficed.
Well, he's got the reason why it was taken.
The reason was it was so badly protected an item. To my special skills, it was so easy to remove and escape. Well, of course, killing that was one thing. If they caught me moving their Vermeer, that would be a lot more serious. It was stolen from Kenwood Hall. It's in Hampstead. It belonged to the Guinness family. I think they gave it to the nation some years ago. There's a fine collection of paintings up there, and probably some of them are quite vulnerable. Several robbery squad were making their way up in the hope of shooting both of us dead. There was an escape route. Now, I was particularly famous.
That was a load of rubbish. He didn't get money for it, David. They dropped the case.
Selling it or
No, to get him out of prison.
right.
Oh, no, they weren't in prison. Ronnie Bird had an old Bill who looked after him. Ronnie Bird was more of a buyer. And I don't know what happened, but he got into a bit of trouble and no one could help him. So, what they would do was give the painting back, and they all walked. David was on, what was David on? I can't think what David was nicked for. It might have been the jewel factory, but he got grass, so they were waiting for him. He grassed him. The guy who killed his stepfather, what was his name? Married to a Jewish girl he was. When he was a young kid, him and his stepfather were having a lot of trouble with some people. And he heard footsteps up the back garden one night. He was in on his own and he shot him, and it was his stepfather. And they actually were going to hang him, but they can't think of his name now. But he became a grass. I think. Can't remember his name.
And that was because David always told me that when he had it, was it I think kept in the back of the car, and they didn't. Because it's interesting you saying that there was a plan, because David's kind of I always thought that David didn't know what to do with it, hence
No. It was something really, that's what it was done for. That's what I think. But it's something I wouldn't, well, if he wants to own up to it, let him own up to it, eh?
Yeah. Because Dave was tried to get the Price Sisters released on the back of it. Do you remember that?
That's not a good sign if you're going round. Anyway, when she turned up to tell me the business, Sandy, she said, and that lovely guy who tells you fortunes, he comes round all the time. I said, does he? So when she went, I rang him up. And I said, is that the fortune man? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm just about fucking reading yours. I said, you ever come near me again, I will chop your head off. Goodbye. You didn't see that coming, did you, you bark? Cheek. But, you know, as far as I was concerned, that was it. But as I say, I will never forgive him. She came round to me twice. And I just didn't want to know about it. I thought he took the piss living a couple of turnings away. I thought that was, you know. And then when he come out of prison, he said to Bernard, do you know she's changed? I thought she'd have me back. She's not the same Carol. Of course she ain't the same, 'cause she's got a toy boy. Bloody hell, you ain't of an old man, are you? Mind I've aged him, haven't I? I honestly thought, I know you, I mean, I had the cheek to think I would have took anything, but not have a woman knocking on the door. I thought he was thin because he was a vegetarian. He must have been eating about 4 bloody Sunday lunches, wasn't he, with all the birds he had? Hello, Dad.
Very funny. So if you could say, yeah, I remember Peter Scott, and it was perfect the way you said, yeah, I remember Peter Scott. He, I knew his driver, the Sophie Loren, chucked it in the river.
So you can't say that.
Yeah.
Was it really? Was it how much?
£40 million they wanted in those days.
Mm.
When was it start? What day was that?
I'm not sure the exact date was actually.
Early
started.
70s, late 70s, mid 70s?
Yeah, it must have been about. GLC was still in power, but then that broke up, didn't it, the GLC?
Mid-80s, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it was, it had to be about 70, 71?
I'll just check.
Ned Cutlet, his name was. Who was Ned Cutlet? He was the guy who was in charge of it, wasn't he? He ran the GLC. Ned Cutlet, I'm sure his name was. Because I used to work, I worked for the council for many years, and with the money brokers, investing money. I used to get the Ansards and things like that. This was before you even had telly. Then you could watch Parliament now, but you couldn't in those days. And we used to get them all the time, and he was always going off that Ned Cutlet through the book.
74.
Yeah, that's when it broke up, didn't it? But he was still in charge of it then, so it was still going. And I think me and David broke up about, let me see, it must have been about 75, 74, something like that.
Right. So it would sort of cross over time, yeah.
Yeah. See, the trouble we're talking about this is, they're not going to like it, the old bill, about, for one thing, because of, I mean, people nowadays do know that police officers are corrupt, but they didn't then. And I think that there's still quite a lot of animosity about talking about police officers taking drinks and things like that. I think you've got to be very careful about it. I mean, there's loads of things that could be told, but I think that they'll all end up in Brixton. Me would be prostrate as well. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, you've got to be very careful.
Mm.
But I would say that she knew more about it. I would not trust Danny or Bernard would know more, because she told me that night when I went round there that Bernard was there with his bird. but I never told his wife that, of course. But, because she wanted to come with me, and I had a feeling that Bernard was having a lark. Because me and Pauline was going out, I never told anyone what I was going to do. But because I had her address, I thought this has got to be sorted out now. So when I went round, and I said to the cabbie, Paul, I could keep up Bernard. But, yeah, there was lots of goings on around there, there's no two ways about it. I think prove his innocence by not taking the Colenso diamond, and yet there was people coming up saying that they took the Van Meer and holding hands up to it. Could say something like that, could you? I mean, what else could you say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
A good way to start it, really.
yeah,
All right, when you're ready.
right.